Welcome to the Diversity Report podcasts, co-sponsored with the Systemic Diversity and Inclusion LinkedIn Network. I'm Deborah Levine, Editor-in-Chief of the American Diversity Report and your host, and with me today is Pam Teagarden. Now, Pam is an amazing woman. That's all there is to it. She is a former banker with graduate studies in behavioral psychology and works from the intersection of business and behaviors. She developed artificial intelligence models of inclusive diversity using cutting-edge systems, information to provide performance-based measures of effective inclusion. Yes, we know that's difficult. Linking diverse workforces directly to increasing competitive advantage and to sustainable high levels of employee engagement. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
This is amazing work. How did you get started on this? What motivated you?
Well, it was a lot of motivations that came along a path. It was not one thing in particular, as many as you, I know, have done, and as many of the people listening have done. You go through pings in your career, and I used to be in the finance industry. And when I got into the people development side, studying psychology in grad school, I couldn't go into any company and talk about people practices without saying, and the bottom line is, and the opposite as well. If I'm going in to do change management, I think, and how are the people going to be dealt with? So I've been introduced as what happens when an organizational consultant and a life coach have a baby. And I think that's pretty true.
So noted. I love it. So you are a very observant person. What are we missing about this diversity and inclusion inside organizations, inside our workplaces?
Well, that's really what brought me to the research that I've done around inclusive diversity, because we have it backwards. My opinion is that we have it backwards. Okay. We talk about D&I, diversity and inclusion, which means we bring in all of these differently looking, differently able, differently thinking people, and then we say, okay, be inclusive. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? And we just sort of, it's like we just added another buzzword. I do remember in the 80s when it started to become, diversity became the word, then it was diversity and inclusion. So if you think about it, we've just been playing a bit of a game of insanity, really, where we just changed the buzzword, but we're trying to do the same thing and expect different results every time we do it. So to me, that bothered me a little bit in terms of, I go into the lobbies of organizations and they'll have one of those video screens with, a man, a woman, everybody, and it says inclusive at the bottom. I think, how do you even know? Just because they showed up, you're inclusive? So that interested me quite a lot. And when I got into the measures, I started seeing that the measurements really were head count. And that's a lagging indicator. It doesn't predict. We had this many women counted as of today. How do we know we'll get another one? How do we know we're going to sustain those that we have? And how do we know they're performing? So it's an interesting dilemma. But when I got into my research, I realized that with all this insanity and with all of these sort of flipped around backwards kind of buzzwords, the conversation was getting tired. I mean, Rosa Parks sat on the right seat in the bus 11 days and 10 years before I was born, and I'm 53. And we're having Black Lives Matter conversations. So it's an emotional, very long, very tired conversation that has not lost any importance and is probably now much, much more urgent because of the biases and sometimes hostility and emotionality that we bring to the table and it comes after our souls are crushed in a political conversation, we go into the workplace. And it's where I started doing all this research.
Well, we are indeed a society, a world Okay. Of conflict these days and snarkiness and you name it, it just keeps multiplying.
It's
It's
true.
hard to deal with. So, what do you recommend? How do we deal with it?
Well, I think it's interesting because we've had bias training, and that's been the latest offering, and it's beautiful. I should say, in along that line, that actually when I started my research, I didn't find anything that wasn't beautiful that was being done or helpful in some way. What got us here, I believe, was well worth our time. What got us here won't get us there, and so that's where I'm sitting. Bias training actually is the most recent iteration of gender awareness workshops and all the things that we used to have prior to those workshops happening. And I think what's happening in the bias training that I see inside organizations is that we're we're uh, we're using the word bias just generally, and there are layers and layers of biases. I have found 4 layers of bias that are breaking down business. And to my, as I see bias training, I want to say it's my opinion, but it's also the opinion of some experts that I've collaborated with, that actually the bias training that's happening is probably looking at the first 2 levels of bias. And without getting down a rabbit hole, we're talking about looking at gender, race, maybe LGBTQ, some of this sort of uh, perspective biases and contextual biases that make up stereotypes. And what ends up happening is we might get a Harvard bias survey where we understand what biases we hold. We label, that. We talk about the biases that we have in the room. We talk about tolerating each other's differences, et cetera, et cetera. Wonderful things. Though biases are unbreakable neurological processes. There's infinite numbers of biases, and they're I could have trouble with someone because they don't like pizza. I mean, it is literally infinite, and there are layers and layers of biases that don't just come one at a time. And so I think where you get to the end of that and knowing that they're unbreakable, knowing that there's infinite numbers that we couldn't cover in a workshop, then you come down to the idea also that there are psychological triggers, very deeply set psychological triggers in some cases, and they're very personal. So I have talked to a male in Saudi who has a female boss in the US. That's a religious, that's a cultural norm that differs from the organizational norm. It's unbelievable what we think we can accomplish once bias training is over. Is it a bad thing? No, not at all. It's beautiful. It really helps capture the idea that there's bias awareness, that I have it and that you have it. And we work really hard to get out of our head every now and then. We catch ourselves being biased and right ourselves in those moments. Though what we're left with when we're done, having done all that beautiful stuff, we still have biases left that we haven't covered inside the workplace. And what I suppose the result of all that is, the bias training allows us to get along better, but that's not enough if we can't get to work better. So if you take these lagging indicators and the fact that we're trying so hard to tolerate each other's differences and be nice and welcoming and all of that, we are left with, in terms of measurement and hope and bottom line link that I'm looking for, that we're left with just really optimism. Fingers crossed everyone will continue to understand their biases and right themselves, and that these lagging indicators won't go away. And I don't want to be left with that.
I understand. You know how I feel about things.
I did. I've really set a doomsday picture, haven't I? And it's all out of love, because there's no one in the world that is more excited about the opportunity. Well, I shouldn't say no one. You're just as excited. So the two of us, at the least, are very excited about the opportunities here. And it just pains me when I see the lagging indicators and the stop short level of outcome in bias training.
Well, it's true. And I'm sure you get a lot of questions from people trying to understand what is involved. Can you share some of those questions with us?
Yeah, it's funny because most of the time, we were talking just before we hit record, most of the time when people listen to me in the beginning, when I say it's backwards and it's lagging indicators, and they're just nodding up a storm and they're just so excited and yes, 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 I'm with you. And then I say, and to solve for that, and then it's sort of a, because it feels like, uh, even though I say what got us here was wonderful, it feels like some of that time or money was wasted, and there may be some of that, but it feels like starting over, because they ask me questions like, what do you mean the buzzwords? Why, what is this, and how do we get out of that insanity? And I say, well, it's actually kind of simple, because if you look at the buzzwords that we've been using in the organizations over the last decades, take the word culture, take the word inclusion, and take the word engagement. Those three words mean relatively the same thing. People coming in, belonging to a culture in the organization, they feel good about it, engagement, they are included in the work. And so those three words have really and truly one budget, if you will. So you start taking diversity, or you take the inclusive diversity models, and you round that into a more prolific HR strategy. And that begs the question, the next thing that comes out of their work and out of their mouths are, well, we already do Myers-Briggs or DISC or StrengthsFinder, and I think, wonderful. Those are all great languages that you need inside of an organization. So it may sound counterintuitive to do what I'm asking to do when I get into these AI models, but we have to sort of stop the bleeding, look at what's working in the organization, take some things and build them into a confluence, and then move forward with the good things that are working inside the organization, giving them a new life in this inclusive diversity strategy. Once I can make them feel better about uh, I'm not just scrapping everything that they've done in my what sounds like cynicism. I'm actually saying, let's look at it, but what's working, we bring along with us. There's something literally missing in the measures, and once that's put together, it's like a glue.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the way you measure so that it helps them move forward.
Well, I knew it had to be simple, because we have so much going on. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean it happens overnight. I'm just saying it needed to be something that we could just insert into what we're already doing that's good. So when I thought about the picture that was being painted by the old way of doing things that got us here, and the bias that's almost ready to bring inside the organization, what I found was that we were spending an awful lot of time tolerating differences. And I thought, well, that's not the way. I mean, think of it, I don't have children, but think of it if you were talking to a child to go out on the play, find out what everybody has in common with you, right? Go for the shared vision. Go out to recess and play a game that you all want to play, right? One of those sorts of human analogies. And we weren't doing that. So the shared vision that every single person inside of our organization has is one. We all want to get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we want to get along with each other and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying that is gone, but the one shared vision, no matter what we look like, is to get the work done. So I started looking beyond those psychometrics, and I realized that the psychometrics that we're using inside of an organization are really measuring personality or values, mostly. Sometimes it'll be a skill, something like that, but when you measure the psyche against a model like personality, they still have to translate that into their work. So I thought, why are we not measuring people around their performance mindsets? And there were certain aspects, there's 9 things that must be a part of those measures. And at the end of all of the, sort of new set of the new survey that needs to be inserted, I realized that the simplicity of this was that we could take and measure with a very brief survey 12 performance mindsets, just 12 performance mindsets. And think of it like brain teaming everyone. We talk about diversity of mindsets, but we really only talk about race and gender, and when we sort of jump right over that one. If we could organize teams and business units around inclusivity in the working practices. So think of it the way I choose to work, the way you choose to work, the way he or she, what is the authentic strength set that we all bring into this organization in performance. Then what we're looking for is how do we, not who are we, how do we perform together? So if I have the 12 mindsets that sort of make up the muscles, if you will, that we use to work, and I measure myself, my team, giving everyone voice into the culture of that team, then I have organized our team around our natural strength sets, which is engagement. It's engagement in our work. Who wants to work outside their natural strength sets? If we could organize work around the natural, authentic strength sets of the people in performance, then, now think of this, we've organized them around their shared vision, inclusion first, so now it's not backwards. We go and we find the diversity that we need, and we bring in, and I'll be silly here for a moment, a one-armed gay woman who is from Mexico and she's 65. Just literally just throwing intersectionalities into the picture. She's brought in because she innovates the way that we need her to innovate on our team. So I'm naturally going to be excited to see somebody help our team innovate. And I may even look up and say, I didn't know you were gay. Because not that that doesn't matter, but that is not the first aspect of us welcoming that person into our team. It is vitally important that we get along and tolerate as many of the differences as we can in a very professional way. But what I have found is that in order to have a predictive, precise performance measure of inclusivity, you just need one brief survey to gain those 12 performance mindsets, create that model, and allow that to sit within the organizational system so the organization can continue to learn. Where do we need to put this person? How does this team? That's where the AI comes in. It's a very dynamic process, because rather than giving you a roadmap, one report after you take this survey, it becomes like the Alexa of business. All of your mindsets are thrown into the system, and the system can say, well, here's how Pam will get that work done. Here's how this person will get that work done. Here's how they'll get it to work together, and all of the goals of the organization are then a part of that systemic look at the psychometrics of the population. So the sustainability of inclusive diversity is fundamentally from technology. And so I've made every effort when I talk about it being an AI model, and I go into the tech companies and I say, I realize you need women in tech and STEM and all these things, but you are also the answer many times for the future of inclusive diversity, because the AI that we can produce using a psychometric system is an amazing thing. It's almost like the Alexa of work. You can ask the question, but it's got the coordinates from the people that more than they knew about themselves, and certainly not biased between each other, because it's a systemic view that is unbiased, because we're all measured on the same scale of performance. We can look for the complementary working relationships and enjoy each other for our different mindsets. and then enjoy each other for the way that we look different.
So it brings us right back to the beginning where I said we were co-sponsored with systemic diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. And my comment was going to be, I hope that makes sense. I can be very close to the research and, get a little too close to, or at least jumping in the rabbit hole. Hopefully I don't fall down. But I hope that made a little bit of sense what I'm trying to do, at least in terms of inciting curiosity, because I can be found at authentum.com, AUTHENTUM, the momentum of authenticity. And so going to that site, authentum.com, and Pamela at authentum.com is how to reach me. I can answer the rest of the questions from the audience, but it is a bit of a jump to go where I'm trying to take people. But I hope the general sense of flipping the equation into inclusive diversity models that allow us to live in world peace for a little while inside the organization to get where we want to go, and the organization has a bottom line effect from that.
Well, I think it's always a bit of a jump or a leap when you're talking to people like yourself who are basically, if you'll allow me to call you this, futurists, because you're not looking at what is already here, you're looking at what will come down the pike and how to plan for it and train for it and be inclusive so that the future will be successful in the workplace. And I think it's wonderful. In the audience, you have heard how to get in touch with Pam, how to look at her internet website and learn more about what she's doing. I urge you to do so, and she's very happy to answer your questions. So there you go for it. And Pam, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and giving us this little peek into the future, and so that we can follow you and go into the future together.
I look forward to that. I respect your work as well. So anytime I can come in your neck of the woods, I would love it. And thank you for this opportunity.
I look forward to that very much. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, audience. We'll see you soon.